everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. Subscribe to Unchained on YouTube, where you can watch the videos of me and my guests. Go to youtube.com/c/Unchained podcast and subscribe today. T-Quorum is a weekly virtual series about all things Tezos. Every Wednesday, join thought leaders, innovators, and blockchain enthusiasts for presentations about the latest advancements that help the ecosystem grow together. Sign up and learn more about the virtual series at tquorum.com. Crypto.com is waiving the 3.5% credit card fee for all crypto purchases until the end of September. Download the Crypto.com app today. Today's guest is Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum. Welcome, Vitalik.
Hi, Laura. Nice to be here.
First of all, congratulations on the 5-year anniversary of Ethereum.
Thank you. Yay. So glad that we're finally here.
So something that's really funny is you and I did our last interview a little over a year ago, and afterward, this was for the live event I did in New York. One of the attendees wrote me and yelled at me saying that because I asked you tough questions that you would never do an interview with me again. So I'm happy that we are proving that person wrong.
Yay.
So upon the 5-year anniversary of the Ethereum network being live, what are your main thoughts and feelings?
Ethereum's definitely come a long way in the last 5 years, and it's definitely been really striking to just see the change, just see how much change there has been, and even just see how more and more of the change is just outside of my and even outside of the Ethereum Foundation's control. So, if you remember Ethereum in 2014 and 2015, it was this much kind of smaller, tighter-knit community. Everyone who was doing anything important kind of knew each other and was coordinating really closely. There was myself, there was Gavin, there was the developer team, there was Vlad, and some other people, and everyone was kind of very closely talking to each other. And then just kind of over time, there just started to be more and more people coming into the community, right? So I remember DEFCON 1 in London was this big kind of coming out party for Ethereum in a lot of ways. And that was when Microsoft announced their cooperation with Ethereum for the first time. And that was huge, right? In 2020, it's okay, it's another bank, another software company doing something. But in 2015, it's whoa, you mean a big software company is doing blockchain things? And since then, there were a lot of these different banking groups doing things on blockchains. There have been a lot of just independent individual projects that all have their own stories. Augur is pretty big and has its own story. Maker is quite big and has its own story, as do all of these other kind of sub-communities within the Ethereum ecosystem that are at this point even themselves bigger than Ethereum was 5 years ago. And so just kind of seeing that expansion and just continuing nonstop, going from 2014 to 2016, and then the big kind of bubble. And then even past the bubble, right? The hype died down, but I think the communities continued to expand in a lot of ways, and just seeing that happen has been incredible. And seeing the technology progress has been incredible. Seeing things like Proof of Stake progress from being, not sure if they can even work, to an idea, to a white paper, to a spec, to now a public multi-client test network has been wonderful as well. So, lots of great things are happening, and I'm very happy that lots of great things are happening.
I solicited some questions on Twitter, and there was an interesting one from someone whose handle was Mr. Kim Crypto. And he said, what would you change if you could do it all over again?
There's definitely a lot of little things. And some of them are technical little things, using a binary tree instead of a hexary tree. And there's 50 different things like that sound really boring. But if we did them, we would have been a year closer to Ethereum 2.0 by now. But aside from that, there's also kind of social things. And in a lot of ways, the social things are kind of the more interesting things, right? So things for example, just the way that the project started and kind of the history of starting off with this kind of big and heavy development team that's like, as opposed to kind of starting with a smaller and kind of more development focused effort. That was one of the things that I might have done differently.
And wait, the distinction you're making when you said big and heavy development team, did you mean the business side?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Side. Yeah. So big and heavy, not just development team. I think, like, for example, the grant program has been great, and we could have been in a much better place had we started that like 2 or 3 years earlier than we did. So a lot of things that the Ethereum Foundation has been kind of doing over the last 2 years has in many ways been just kind of correcting for some of the things that we did in the years before that, and just trying to fix all of the mistakes. And had we known then everything that we know now, then of course we would have just started doing the correct thing from day one. Aside from that, I'm sure there's lots of mistakes that we're still making, but sometimes you don't know what the mistakes are, because if you knew what the mistakes are, then you would find a way to stop making them.
Right. And so let's talk about an issue right now that a lot of people are talking about. I'm sure you're well aware that one of the chief complaints at the moment is the high gas fees. What do you plan to do about that, and what solution do you think would be best to bring them down?
So ultimately, high gas prices are just a function of high demand, right? Like, lots of people want to send Ethereum transactions on the blockchain, and there's not enough space for them. And so people just keep kind of outbidding each other, trying to be the ones that get in. So ultimately, there's only 2 ways to get gas prices down. One is to get people to stop wanting to use Ethereum, and the other is to find a way to increase the amount of space. So first of all, I should say the first one is like slightly less ridiculous than it sounds, right? Because there are specific cases where people are using the Ethereum blockchain in ways where they don't really need to be using it for every single thing that they're using it for, right? So even just to give one example, just a lot of the kind of DeFi arbitrage things that are happening, like they involve people sending lots of transactions and some of them getting on chain. And a lot of the time, just the transactions that get on chain are transactions that just don't do anything because they're not the first to get in a race or whatever, right? So like that kind of category exists. Like there is a lot of room for applications to kind of increase their efficiency. Sometimes it even involves moving things off chain and all of these things. And I know that application teams are definitely working really hard on that. But at the same time, the more interesting and long-term viable thing is obviously increasing scalability, right? And scalability is this thing that we've been talking about for more than 5 years. And like every major Ethereum presentation from me you can find, I probably mentioned scalability. And big problems we're working on: privacy, scalability, user experience, security. What did I forget? Something? Scalability. The difference now, of course, is that instead of just being this kind of faraway theory thing, it's this kind of very short-term necessary reality that we have to find a way to work around. And the good news is that a lot of the scalability solutions are much further ahead now than they were at any time in the past. So Ethereum 2.0 is, of course, the big one that people talk about. And we talk about proof of stake, which is coming very, very soon. But then there's sharding, and sharding is phase 1 and not phase 0. So sharding is going to take a bit longer than the launch of the ETH2 blockchain by itself. So ETH2 is, of course, really important and big, but at the same time, it is kind of farther away than some of the other things. But the good news is that there are these other and closer things in the pipeline, right? So like roll-ups are one thing that I just mention all the time, right? Roll-ups being this kind of really wonderful scalability technique that basically says, instead of doing everything on chain, you just put a very kind of minimum and compressed amount of information on chain that just basically tells people how they should update the state, so how they should update kind of the internal record keeping of this roll-up system, who has how much money in the roll-up. And then instead of putting things like signatures, for example, on chain and verifying them on chain, you just have one zero-knowledge proof that just says, here's a proof that these thousands of signatures exist. And I'm not going to tell you what the signatures are, but here's a proof. It says that they exist, and because it's a cryptographic proof, you can now trust that these transactions are all valid. Or alternatively, you can combine all of these different signatures together and add them all into one big signature, and then say, if anyone can prove that this block is invalid, they can submit a challenge, and only if there's a challenge does any computation happen on chain. Right, so the first family I talked about is the ZK rollup. The second family I talked about is the optimistic rollup. They've both made a lot of progress, right? So like ZK rollups are already live on Ethereum. So if you saw Loopring, the decentralized exchange, it's this Chinese Ethereum company. They've been just putting out this decentralized exchange, and it's basically just a system of Ethereum contracts, and it's been running for a while, and it's worked great. ZK Stink, the one from Matter Labs, so both of those exist, and you can use them. They both even have built-in payments. So I think for ZK rollups, the challenge is that it's like people love Ethereum because Ethereum lets you go beyond just moving coins around. Right, like if you just want to move coins around, then whatever, there's like Mastercoin or like SLP on Bitcoin Cash or like any other of these things, right? Like the true power of Ethereum is that it's not just about that; it's also about all these other things. And so, like moving coins around is a big part of what people use Ethereum for. But if you want to expand beyond that, then like zero knowledge proofs are not yet friendly enough for that. In the future, they will be, right? But we're still a couple of years away. So that's one problem. But if you just want to move coins around, then like the only challenge is that we just have to get all of these, wallets and exchanges and teams kind of to just work together and adopt the thing.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask was earlier when you talked about how the high gas fees reflect high demand. Alex Masmej, he's the guy who's selling shares of himself via a coin, he had a question, which was what percentage of Ethereum block space is used for valuable actions versus bad ones. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Figuring out what's actually valuable is such a tough thing, right? From one standpoint, you could argue that anything that people are willing to pay a 50 gwei per gas for is valuable because, well, by paying that transaction fee, they clearly say it's valuable. But on the other hand, there's a lot of activity happening that's like clearly involves, these kind of competitive games between different people, like just like even, DeFi arbitrage where everyone's just sending a transaction on chain and a lot of them end up failing. And it would be nicer if that entire kind of basically what's happening there is kind of like an auction between all of these arbitrageurs. If that could happen more efficiently in some way, then you really could clear out a lot of kind of Ethereum blockchain space, and that wouldn't actually hurt anyone. There's a lot of cases like that. And then there's obviously applications on the chain that people just might think are outright bad. So, Ponzi's are one example, and there's always like a couple of them somewhere. So it's complicated, and I definitely think that the great majority of the activity is kind of valuable and not the sort that you can just kind of remove by coming up with a slightly better game in some way. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's one of the kind of disadvantages of an open system is that you just get all sorts of characters from all around the world building things on it. So it's hard to tell.
And speaking of complexity, let's now talk about Ethereum 2.0, which, just for me, somebody who spends a lot of time trying to figure out how to convey things to other people, especially when it comes to this space, I find it quite complicated, and I believe that it would be something that would also be complicated for validators to understand and for them to make a cost-benefit analysis, and in general for them to assess what their risks are. And it reminded me a little bit of how DeFi composability introduces a lot of risks because protocol creators can't always foresee what other protocols will introduce. And so I just wonder, do you think that complexity of Ethereum 2.0 does create a risk for the security of the network?
It definitely does. And that's a big part of the reason why we've been working really hard to try to make the protocol simpler. Like, I definitely think that it's twice as simple now as it was a year and a half ago. which has been a very significant leap for us. But at the same time, there's definitely complexity that's unavoidable in some ways, right? Like, if you have a regular blockchain that everyone's just validating everything, if you have a sharded blockchain, then you need some kind of rules for figuring out, who's validating what blocks at what time. And that's just like more code that has to be in there that wouldn't be in there if we weren't sharding, and there's no way around it. Even in like proof of stake, for example, like one of its disadvantages is that it's definitely a bit more technologically complex, because like you have to deal with validators, you have to figure out like what's the process for validators logging in, what's the process for validators logging out, and there's a lot of just kind of management happening in the protocol. So that definitely does exist, though at the same time, I do think a lot of it is just the fact that people are less familiar with proof of stake, and so it feels more like an unknown to them. What actually is the chance that something is crazy is going to happen on chain? I don't know. It's like, how many people are actually going to be willing to validate at an interest rate of 9 or reward rate of 9%? I don't know. So like, these are the sorts of things that like, unfortunately, you just can't make answers to until you have a live running system. So like, I think it's perfectly fair for a lot of people to just kind of say we're sitting out of the thing until it just runs by itself for 1 to 2 years, and that's perfectly fine.
There are so many things I want to discuss around this, but let's maybe just talk about ETH price at the beginning, because one of the things that I gleaned is that the security of Ethereum 2.0 will be highly reliant on the stability and the value of the price. And historically, Ethereum has not been one of those crypto networks that has focused quite a bit on price, especially compared to some of the other coins. So I wondered if you thought that staking will usher in a new era in which Ethereum does focus on the price of ETH and on issues like monetary policy.
It's hard to kind of figure out like what concrete actions could reduce price volatility, for example. Right. And if you look at Ethereum versus a lot of these other coins, like Ethereum's price volatility is not necessarily that high. Like, it's statistically definitely higher than Bitcoin, but it's lower than a lot of these other smaller cryptocurrencies, and even the ones that say, rah, look, we have a fixed cap, and so you should trust us more. So like, there's some aspects of kind of monetary properties of ETH asset that just can't be engineered no matter how hard you try. There are other aspects that you can look at, right? So like, one of the big kind of discussions happening in the Ethereum community is this kind of fee market reform debate around the Ep.183, where basically it's this kind of very significant proposed reform to how transaction fees work, that basically says that instead of having a fixed block size and the kind of transaction fees constantly jumping around, you would have kind of very short-term variable block sizes, and the transaction fee would be kind of stabilized more, and it would not move much between one block to the other. And there's a lot of reasons why this would improve economic efficiency, but one of the other things that it does is it basically means that some portion of coins and transaction fees get burned, which of course means that it reduces issuance, and potentially, like, if there's enough transaction fees, it could even give ETH negative issuance, right? So if you even look at like the transaction fees on the Ethereum network the last 2 weeks, it's been somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 Ether per day. And if you kind of expand that out to per year, then it's looking like, well, 700,000 to like 1.7 million Ether a year, which is higher than the proof of stake issuance that we're expecting, right? So it's actually, negative issuance is not even far outside the realm of possibility for Ethereum. And there's a lot of people kind of in the Ethereum community that are like excited about this, and that kind of actively want us to start talking about monetary policy, taking monetary policy seriously, and all of these things. And which is interesting, and it's also kind of a sign of the project's decentralization in some ways. Like that kind of push towards taking ETH's monetary properties more seriously was definitely not an Ethereum Foundation thing, right? Like, it was just these community members that just like stood up and said, hey, we have ETH and ETH is an asset, and you should care more about ETH the asset, and kind of not talk as though the price doesn't matter, because the reality is that if the price goes down by 90%, then we go bankrupt, and realistically the platform security goes down and the platform breaks. And that would be true in proof of work or proof of stake, right? Like in proof of work, if the price of ETH drops by a factor of 10, then suddenly the Ethereum proof of work miners would have to go and compete with, Ethereum Classic and Dogecoin and all these other coins. And when a coin stops being the dominant coin within its kind of class of proof of work hardware, then it becomes much easier for miners to come in from the outside and attack it. And so really, price has always been a blockchain security concern. It's just people are kind of more willing to talk about it honestly now than in the past.
And what about you? What camp do you put yourself in? Because you sort of talked about it as if you are not in that camp of wanting to place an emphasis on it. But the thing is that, okay, so you have your role at the foundation, but you also have your role as a researcher. And I would imagine as a researcher focused on security, you would recognize that price is a linchpin in the security of Ethereum 2.0.
No, I definitely think price is important for security, and it's important for a lot of things. I mean, I think maybe one kind of difference in emphasis is that, if you have ETH and you're interested in, basically ETH as a kind of get-rich asset, then you care about, the probability that it goes up to 10,000. But if you care about the value of ETH for network security purposes, or even for making sure the ecosystem continues to have funding, or for just plain old kind of stability to ensure the utility of ETH, then the thing you care more about is the price of ETH not dropping to zero. Those are two kind of somewhat different kinds of caring about the price, right? One focuses more on maximizing the upside, and the other focuses more on just minimizing downside risk. So I think there is definitely a kind of convergence of goals there between, people who hold ETH because they want it to go up, and people who realize that ETH having value is necessary for security. But there is also this other divergence as well. But in practice, I don't think it ends up causing that much of a disagreement.
And so it sounds like ultimately you think the monetary policy for ETH will be variable. It sounds like sometimes it will be deflationary and sometimes it will be inflationary, and it just sort of depends on what's happening with demand on the network.
That's definitely the current path. And this has definitely also been another one of the kind of big debates for us. On the one hand, we recognize that there's kind of meme value in having a cap, and there's the value in being able to say, the price will, or the market cap, the token supply will never go above 150 billion. We're going to go not one step backward from here. And even going out and saying crazy things like, if the Ethereum protocol ever changes so there's more than 150 million Ether, then it is no longer Ethereum. These things that coin supply maximalists say, which are kind of obviously false, but kind of motivational at the same time. And our posture has always been to kind of not go in that direction. Basically, our kind of line is that ultimately there's a trade-off between stability of the coin supply and stability of the security level of the blockchain. And ultimately, Ethereum isn't a coin first. It's a worldwide decentralized technology platform first. And so stability of the security level is more important than stability of the coin supply. And at the same time, we definitely kind of recognize what we're missing out on by taking that path. So I don't know. It's a difficult question. I think the community's views and my own and a lot of people's views are definitely still kind of in flux on this.
Yeah, and earlier when you talked about how right now you are making these theoretical assumptions about what will happen with Ethereum 2.0, but ultimately you won't really know until it goes live. I saw that you read this economic review of Ethereum 2.0 that was put out by researchers at Consensus. And in that, they assert that the cost of perpetrating attacks on Ethereum 2.0 will be lower than in Ethereum 1.0. And they advocated that there be a minimum of 13.8% of the network supply of ETH be staked. And afterward, you tweeted that you disagreed and you thought it didn't need to be that high. And so it strikes me that, you admitted earlier you really don't know, but wouldn't it be kind of better to err on the side of caution in this case?
So, I feel like we have strong kind of outside of you arguments for why attacking a proof of work chain should be attacking a proof of stake chain should be much more expensive than attacking a proof of work chain, right? The outside view argument basically is that if you look at what a proof of work mining rig does, it mines for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then you have to buy another one. And even while it's running, you have to pay for a lot of electricity and you have to do a lot of maintenance. And so the cost of a mining rig should realistically target somewhere around 1 year, maybe 1.5 years of issuance, right? Basically what that would, or the cost of all the mining rigs that are currently out there, rather, should target maybe a year to 1.5 years of issuance, right? Because that's roughly the time horizon within which those mining rigs are going to be actually working, kind of subtracting out electricity and maintenance and Moore's law and all of those things. But with proof of stake, if you have coins, then the coins aren't going to just burn after 1.5 years of staking, right? After 1.5 years of staking, you can just get your coins out again. And so we should expect the ratio between kind of the cost of the backing assets and the cost of the rewards to be much higher in proof of stake than it is in proof of work, right? And that's something I told them, and that's something that I remember when I did my own kind of quick calculations on kind of the cost of proof of work ASICs, I definitely got a number that was substantially lower than theirs. But I don't know. It's definitely kind of a puzzle, what's in that analysis. And I'd definitely be happy to just talk to them more and just see how to kind of get these different perspectives to line up with each other.
Yeah, and one other thing that I wanted to ask about was, and maybe this is just me not knowing the system that well, but when I was reading their economic review, it seemed that in most situations, staking would be profitable, but at low prices, the net yield for stakers does go into the negative. And I wondered if there was some mechanism that's similar to the difficulty mining algorithm in Bitcoin that then makes staking more profitable if the net profit goes into the negative, so as to incentivize more people to stake and push the price up. Because otherwise it just seems like then you could end up in these death spiral type situations.
Right. It's a challenge, right? Because if you respond to prices dropping by increasing the issuance rate, then you risk entering into another kind of death spiral, which is price goes down, print more coins, price goes down more, print goes both coins, and you get Ethereum goes the way of all of these hyperinflating fiat currencies. And so we definitely don't want that, right? And I think the challenge with that sharded blockchains do have is basically that if you have a blockchain where the capacity of the blockchain is n times bigger than the capacity of one single computer, then ultimately you need to have at least n computers in the blockchain somewhere in the network for it to be able to process all those transactions, right? And actually you would need somewhere more than n times 200 because you want redundancy, but you get how you need at least n plus some factor, right? The problem, of course, is that in the worst case, if people stop caring about Ethereum and the size of the user community goes down to n-1, then you're kind of screwed no matter what the mechanism is, right? So there's this kind of mathematical challenge here that kind of sharded chains do have. And I think this problem is actually one of the things that's probably going to end up putting limits on the capacity of a sharded blockchain, right? So we're doing 64 shards with kind of an eye to pushing up to 1,024 eventually. And then some people might ask, well, why are you sticking with this kind of what we call quadratic sharding, just kind of two-layer structure where you just have shards of shards? Like, why not just go all the way and have shards of shards of shards and then go up to infinity? And the answer basically is like, well, if you put the number of shards to be really high, then if the size of the community drops to below what you were expecting, then the network can't really verify anything and you're kind of screwed again, right? Ideally, of course, what you would want actually is you would want a system that says if the price of the currency drops, then like if the US dollar price of the currency drops, then kind of dial down the capacity of each of these shards and try to dial down the number of shards or whatever and kind of scale down the size of the system, right? But the problem is that it's hard for blockchains to have built-in price oracles. It's hard to make oracles kind of decentralized enough for kind of a layer one. And so we have this problem where either a sharded system has to be kind of much smaller than it otherwise would be, which is the path that Ethereum is going, or a sharded system has to kind of dynamically scale up and down with some metric of how big its community is. And the problem is that the blockchain has no way of measuring how big its community is because, Sybil attacks and all of that stuff. So like the economic kind of price dependence is actually like basically a version of that same problem, right? Like it basically says that, if the price goes down a lot and so people are less just interested in the Ethereum network, then the Ethereum network maybe no longer has the ability to compensate all of these people just for running nodes that are part of the chain. And we do have some ways of kind of partially dealing with this, right? So like, for example, one thing that would happen in that kind of scenario, like if there were low prices and people dropped out, is that the amount of ETH staked would end up dropping. And once the amount of ETH staked drops below a certain amount, like I think it's either 4 million or 8 million, I forget, then what happens is that the shards sometimes start skipping slots. So like basically you stop having every shard have one block every slot. And so the capacity of the system kind of starts shrinking because of that. And so there is kind of a bit of this auto-adjusting mechanic that helps kind of stabilize the chain in that case. But it's definitely far from perfect. And there are kind of just fundamental impossibilities that we have to whack against.
All right, so in a moment, we're going to talk more about issues regarding proof of stake as well as DeFi. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible. How much in fees are you paying for your crypto purchases? Crypto.com is waiving the 3.5% credit card fee for all crypto purchases, which means you can buy crypto with a 0% fee. Apart from your crypto purchases, you can also get a great deal on food and grocery shopping too. Get up to 10% back on Uber Eats, McDonald's, Domino's Pizza, Walmart, and many more when you pay with your MCO Visa card. No card? On the Crypto.com app, buy gift cards and get up to 20% back from merchants like Whole Foods, Safeway, Burger King, Papa John's, and Domino's. Download the Crypto.com app today and enjoy these offers till the end of September. Looking for a place to connect with thought leaders, innovators, and blockchain enthusiasts of every level? Welcome to T-Quorum, a weekly virtual series about all things Tezos. Each week will feature presentations about the latest advancements, from baking and staking and developer tooling to DeFi projects and community content that will help the ecosystem grow together. This year, T-Quorum will be opening up its podium to you. If you're interested in presenting, submit your ideas, and the Tezos community will vote on who they'd like to hear from next. Sign up and learn more about the virtual series at tquorum.com. Back to my conversation with Vitalik Buterin. I also got a good question from Tarun Chitra of Gauntlet Network. And he pointed out that existing proof of stake networks have run into capital constraint issues for some of their validators, and that some, individuals in particular find it unprofitable to be validators, and they can't realize economies of scale without professional validation setups similar to what you'd get from Amazon Web Services. So how do you think Ethereum's proof of stake system can be more democratic?
So I think there's two major differences in the incentive structure between Ethereum and a lot of these other chains, right? So one of them is that a lot of these other systems end up kind of implicitly making the assumption that they expect like the majority of their participants or a really, really huge number of participants to stake, right? And they set the numbers and they try to basically create a situation where like 80% of people are staking or 50% of people are staking or some other fairly huge number like that. And Ethereum is not doing that, right? Ethereum is basically targeting, somewhere between 5 and 30% staking as kind of the level that we're kind of expecting / wanting, with the wanting probably being kind of a bit on the higher side of that. But, if it's lower, that's fine too. So that's one part of the response, right? Which is that like we're explicitly expecting there to be kind of fewer stakers than a lot of these other networks, and that's fine. The other part of the response is that our incentive structure is like deliberately designed to be very forgiving, right? So like a lot of these other chains, they have staking incentive structures that basically say if you're online less than like 95% or 90% of the time, then like you start getting these penalties very quickly. And Ethereum is not like that, right? In Ethereum, you can be net profitable even if you're on offline like 30% or potentially even 40% of the time. Ethereum is like basically designed, at least in terms of its incentives, for kind of more immature stakers that potentially kind of have their setups break more often. And that was a deliberate design choice. Like we're definitely not deliberately trying to kind of engineer for a high performance network. Basically because, if you engineer for a high performance network, then like you risk creating incentives for everyone to start like concentrating in the same cloud computing setups. And then are you really decentralized? Are you really censorship resistant and all of these things? So like in Ethereum, we've made a lot of these conservative choices, like, target the percentage online that we're targeting. I mean, even the test nets are like they jump between 80 to 95%, I think. Whereas like, I think Cosmos or some of these other networks, they just constantly stay considerably above 95%. In other places, the 12-second slot time, right? So Ethereum's slot time, Ethereum 2 slot time is 12 seconds. And in the future, I could see it decreasing to 8 seconds or 6 seconds, but, we're never going to go all the way to 1 second, whereas some of these other chains are. So, there's a lot of these kind of trade-offs that we're making where we kind of definitely refuse to, satisfy a lot of people's needs for peak performance. But I think the result is more resilience.
Okay, yeah, Tarun and his colleague, or actually I think it's Alex Evans, a placeholder, they wrote up a great post on how staking actually lends itself to the kind of securitization that looks very similar to mortgage-backed securities. Did you see that post?
I think I saw it. I don't remember too well. It was a while back.
Yeah, it's about just lending and but I mean, granted, obviously these products are more transparent because all this happens in a smart contract. But they pointed out these are the kinds of financial products that did lead to the creation of Bitcoin. So we were curious what your opinion was on that.
Honestly, I'm less worried about staking and more worried about existing DeFi. I guess the thing with staking is that, I definitely would expect the kind of staking setups to just remain fairly simple because basically either you're staking yourself or you're giving your money to someone else who stakes for you. And like maybe you can like crunch things beyond that and you could say, oh, here's a slight a contract and it gives 80% of the first 80% of the ETH to the holder of one coin and the last 20%, which is much more performance dependent, to the holder of another coin. And then you can concentrate the kind of ownership of these tokens that represent like basically interest in really high quality staking and all of these things. But generally, I guess I'm not expecting the complexity of just that part to go too high. But the places where the complexity can go high is basically if people want either just a lot of the things that people are doing with existing these DeFi projects, so kind of trying to get leverage on different assets and trying to get financial arrangements that kind of satisfy like very specific functions and yield farming and all of these things, or potentially kind of those things plus proof of stake, right? So like you could imagine there is lending ETH, but then you could imagine a system that allows you to lend staked ETH, And if you're lending stake deep, then suddenly it starts mattering, well, who's doing the staking? There's definitely concerns. I guess my kind of big picture reason why I'm not too scared is basically that if we just maintain this really kind of important property that says that if an attack happens, then lots of coins get destroyed, right? If you just maintain that invariant, that if an attack happens, then 5 million coins that were responsible for the attack get destroyed somehow, then you know that, well, the maximum that you can have is like 10 attacks before half the ETH gets destroyed. And at that point, no one's going to be interested in staking in any financial setup ever again, right? So like, this is part of why I'm really into, security deposits and penalties and slashing and all of these things, even though a lot of other people are not. Like, I just like this aspect that it basically lets you kind of put a cap on the number of times the thing breaks, basically.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there are so many things we could discuss because a part of me does wonder now also about this proliferation of derivatives and how that introduces new ways for people to profit by destroying the price of Ether. But instead of going down that rabbit hole, I actually want to ask you more about your criticisms of DeFi. What are your main criticisms and concerns?
I think one big one is just that a lot of people are underestimating smart contract risk. So I remember even a year ago, there were people on Twitter, I think it was, making the case that, hey, if you have dollars in a regular bank account, then you're making maybe 2% interest, and that assumes, some kind of fixed deposit, whatever. And if it's variable, then it's even less. But if you put your dollars into compounds and you're getting 4%, well, why the hell would anyone choose 2% over 4%? Clearly 4% is better. Or even if you put your dollars in DAI, clearly 4%, back when it was 4%, clearly 4% is better. And my response was, well, 4% is only better than 2% if those systems are exactly the same in every other way, right? And in fact, for the 4% system to be better than the 2% system, you basically need the 4% system to have less than a 2% chance a year of breaking, right? Because if the 4% system has a 5% chance a year of breaking, then it becomes negative 1%. And so I feel like there's a lot of people that are just not fully taking this into account in some of their calculations. And, they might think that, oh, okay, it's been safe for a while, and these projects are audited. And a lot of these DeFi projects really have done a great job of auditing themselves and just doing a way better job of that and learning from the mistakes of the DAO and all of those things. But at the same time, are we safe enough that we can promise a chance of breaking of less than 2% a year? I don't think we can get there yet, right? So that's one thing. And so I think kind of the main takeaway from that criticism, I guess, is that DeFi is still fine, but don't act like it's a place where you should advocate for a lot of regular people to put their life savings into. Now, there are, of course, places where, CeFi, and as in the traditional banking system, has risks too, right? And there's a lot of people who, because of their specific context, their money might get seized or their local currency might get hyperinflated or all of these things. And so if you're in one of those situations where the risks of the centralized kind of stuff is greater than 2% a year from you, then, by all means, get into DeFi and it's safer. Or at least, when I say DeFi, in this case, I mean stable coins, right? Get into stable coins and they're safer. But if you're just in DeFi to get, 4% interest instead of 2% interest, then that's probably not something you should be doing. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there are sometimes DeFi things happening that are not very sustainable. Right. So one big example of this is yield farming, right? So this big hot trends that we've been seeing recently. And you can often get these really high interest rates. It was 20%, 30%, 100+% annually. But the problem is that these interest rates are ultimately, they're paid for by rewards explicitly provided by whatever protocol is doing the lending, right? They're either provided by Compound or they're provided by whoever else. I forget what the acronyms are these days. And those guys are not going to just keep on printing coins for people to entice people to get into their ecosystems forever, right? It's a short-term thing, and like once the enticements disappear, you can easily see the yield rates like drop back down very close to 0%. So that's not something that could make DeFi break, but it definitely is a sign that like we should not necessarily be treating a kind of temporary advantages that we have now as reasons or as things that we should be pushing out in front of the entire world as like reasons why everyone should get into DeFi. Because if you push them out to the entire world, then by the time people start getting into DeFi, these kind of temporary advantages are not going to be there anymore.
Well, so I want to ask you how it makes you feel that like DeFi right now and yield farming in particular, kind of the main things that Ethereum is either used for, at least known for, or it's kind of, what people are talking about when it comes to Ethereum. And before that, ICOs, which I know you also, at the time of the ICO craze, you tweeted critically about those. And, all those things have been the major use cases of Ethereum so far. So how does it make you feel to see that your creation is being used for those things? And a two-part question, what can you do to steer things more in a direction of how you'd like to see Ethereum being used?
I definitely think that those things aren't the only use cases, and I just keep kind of discovering people using Ethereum for lots of other things. Like there's people that just use ETH for payments. There's people that use ETH to just move money from one country to another. There's even people using ETH for in-person payments. And I even used ETH to pay at a restaurant in London a few months ago. So like, and then you have prediction markets like Omen, which is great, and then there's Augur, which is coming out at the end of the month. So there's a lot of Ethereum applications coming out that I'm definitely excited about. And I'm also just excited by the fact that in some of the non-Ethereum communities that I'm kind of close to, people are increasingly just starting to pay attention to Ethereum. So like one of the things I tweeted recently is there was this article about it was this Nigerian person that was basically describing a proposal for a new spelling system for, I think it was the Igbo and like one other language that's common in Nigeria. And when I read through that article, I saw at the end of the article, there was an Ether donation option. And there was a comment box where this was one of those kind of post comments that go directly on the Ethereum blockchain sort of things, right? So that's one example. And then another example I just saw like in the rationalist communities, people are just starting to link to some of these Omen prediction markets more and more, right? So like,
I mean, I still think these are anecdotal, right? I mean, by and large, at the moment, it's DeFi, and before that, it was ICOs. I'm not trying to say it's not used for these other things, but how does it make you feel that
it is used
you've
for
been
those
a little
other
bit?
Things?
Yeah.
I guess like my goal is to kind of empower all of these other use cases that we like, and I guess hope that these kind of more hypey use cases are all like they might be big individually, but they're like just because they're so unsustainable individually, they only each last for like 1 or 2 years. So it is it's definitely a long game, right? Like I feel like the ratio of like things that I'm excited about to just like financial speculating things has definitely improved between 2017 and 2020, right? So, in 2017, there was this big ICO craze, and there were also kind of off in the corner a couple of people using Ethereum for, well, what was it back then? Like there was Augur, and Augur had like a couple of dozen users, and like maybe there were people trying to make a DAO and there were people just using ETH for payments. So in 2017, Maker didn't even exist yet, or at least it wasn't on chain. It was just a project, right? And in 2020, ICOs kind of did their boom and bust, and they've collapsed. But now we have DeFi and we have yield farming, and like I'm definitely not expecting yield farming to be a multi-billion-dollar industry 2 years from now. I mean, unless of course you count staking as yield farming, like staking technically has yield, but like whatever it'll be a much more kind of subdued and boring thing. Like that's a prediction I'm happy to make. But I think kind of the more interesting use cases of Ethereum are going to stay, and they're only going to grow stronger. So that's my hope. In terms of like what we can do to help realize that hope, and I think one thing is to just help some of these other applications that kind of advertise themselves and kind of get more attention and get in the community is one thing. And it's one thing that we've definitely been kind of trying to do. Aside from that, like just aside from these kind of deliberate efforts to kind of either help these applications develop or kind of improve these applications, social status, and there's definitely a limit to how much we can do. So.
And what do you think is the most optimal way for DeFi projects to distribute their tokens?
Yeah, this is a tough question, right? Because like I recognize the challenge that these projects are in, right? Because if you're going to launch with a token, you have to distribute the token. And if you have to distribute the token somehow. And in 2009, the cool thing was proof of work, and proof of work was very nice and democratic. But now, we hate proof of work, and proof of work is like neither democratic nor necessary. Then in 2017, it's like, if you want to distribute your coins, you sell your coins, and now ICOs are not hip anymore. So like, what do then in 2018 and 19, we had airdrops, and like, the problem with airdrops, of course, is that you get nothing for them, and it's not clear how effective they are in actually kind of creating interest for your ecosystem. I grant that there is a genuine challenge here, and that's a big part of why I'm not willing to just go all out in criticizing some of these projects, right? I mean, there's a twofold challenge, right? One part of the twofold challenge is basically that like the economics of building anything cyber are often very screwed up, basically because you're building something that has a zero marginal cost, right? You're building something where it's, there's a lot of cost involved in just building everything out at the beginning, but then once you've built something, then the cost of like distributing each additional unit of like ability to participate is close to free. But the problem is that if you just make your thing close to free, then like how do you pay for additional development? And this was like one of the big problems of just the whole internet. And launching a token was this kind of one way of just kind of finally being able to break out of that trap. And so of course people want to launch tokens. And then if you don't do the token route, then like what can you do? Well, you can apply to the Ethereum Foundation, and like maybe the Ethereum Foundation will give you a $250,000 grant, which is already much better than 3 years ago, where it would have given you a $10,000 grant. Like there's still this kind of difference between like the scale of thing that people want to build and the scale of financing that you can support that way. So yeah, and I definitely understand that these project teams are facing tough challenges and that we don't have great solutions to direct them towards. So yield farming or liquidity mining or whatever it is definitely like one of these paths that people have tried. And I think like some level of that kind of distribution is definitely okay. Like I think some level of this idea that, if you have a project, some system, and that system has a fee in it, then like refunding that fee in protocol tokens basically distributes protocol tokens to your users, and that's really nice and wonderful. Like there's a level of that which is legitimate. Like I think it becomes illegitimate when basically you're refunding people more money to use the protocol than they're spending to use the protocol, and so people end up just like dunking their coins in and getting money out without actually like using the protocol. And I think like in the long run, if projects do that, what's going to happen is that people are just going to like professionalize farming, and they're going to say, hey, give us our coins or give us your coins, and we'll just like keep on sticking your coins into all of these projects that are offering rewards. And like, we're not actually going to be part of their communities because why should we? And so, yeah, like, kind of the equilibrium that I think will happen, which is part of why I'm comfortable kind of criticizing extreme liquidity farming as being unsustainable. Like there's some level of it, which I think there's some level of liquidity farming, which is fine. There's some level of airdrops, which is fine. I mean, I'm looking forward to per person airdrops as well. I'm even looking forward to sales with per person caps even. I mean, DAICOs could still be done, or even just kind of things that bootstrap into being DAOs from day one are also interesting. I mean, this whole kind of like distribute coins directly to developers thing is interesting. I mean, Handshake kind of did something like that with part of their distribution model, and I know like even just the concept of developer pre-mines in general is kind of that, but like the problem with coming up with something in that direction that's good is that you need a governance mechanism, and the governance mechanisms are hard. We'll keep going. We'll keep figuring out better things.
Another big trend on DeFi these last few months really is Bitcoin on Ethereum. It's been skyrocketing. And at the moment of recording, it's about $160 million worth of Bitcoin is on Ethereum. What do you think is the significance of this trend, and where do you think it could go?
I think that there's just a lot of people who want to like both hold Bitcoins and have the conveniences of Ethereum DeFi. Like these Bitcoin on Ethereum projects satisfy that need. I mean, I think in the medium term, you could even see, Bitcoin on Ethereum getting into rollups, and then we have like another Bitcoin like hyperscalable layer 2 protocol. So I think it's a combination of like DeFi demand and just demand, like especially kind of going further into the future for just some of Ethereum's other conveniences. So where will this go? I don't know. I mean, at this point, there's definitely demand. There's definitely more and more people who are interested in kind of straddling the line between the Bitcoin and Ethereum kind of ecosystems, both in terms of communities, as we've kind of seen on Twitter and other places, and in terms of just like what they use, right? Bitcoin on Ethereum. One thing that could happen is that some of these people are just realize that like, hey, why, for on Ethereum, then why not just use ETH as an asset? Another thing that could happen is that there's just more and more demand for this, and Ethereum becomes kind of the primary place where Bitcoin activity happens. And then if that happens, like one of the challenges and one of my worries with these bridges is that basically the bridges are all right now trusted, right? So like the problem is that Bitcoin, like the Ethereum blockchain can run smart contracts that verify the Bitcoin blockchain, but Bitcoin doesn't really have this kind of advanced smart contract capability. And so you can't have Bitcoin addresses that verify the Ethereum blockchain. And like all you can have is either single signatures or multi-sigs. And so the problem is that if you have one of these multi-sigs, then you start having, 557,000 Bitcoins inside one of these multi-sigs, then there might be an incentive for that team to run away, and that starts becoming more and more of a systemic risk, right? I guess one of the ways of thinking about this is that like a lot of Bitcoin people are very excited about Liquid, but Liquid, it's ultimately a permission consortium chain, to use the Tim Swanson term for it. I just love using that term to poke people. It's a permission consortium chain. It's trusted, and ultimately, there is a committee of people who have the ability to basically take the coins out and pretty much take the coins for themselves. And so, if you're willing to take that trade-off, well, why not just instead take that trade-off with the Ethereum network, essentially, because the Ethereum network already has like so much stuff on it. Like that's where I see some of the kind of the psychology of this being. Then, if it gets much bigger, then you do have this systemic risk issue. And then the question is, well, how does the systemic risk end up getting resolved, right? One possibility, of course, is that we start moving to these kind of collateralized Bitcoin on ETH things like TBTC network. But the problem with that is that if you start going to like 557,000 Bitcoins on Ethereum, then you need a huge amount of ETH to like, you need literally like half of all ETH basically being collateral for those coins. Another interesting approach, and this is something that I don't think anyone's talked about before, is that if like a substantial portion of Bitcoin ends up being on Ethereum, then what happens if Bitcoin miners start taking matters into their own hands, and Bitcoin miners basically pre-commit and they say, we're going to soft fork away, like we're going to invalidate any chain that includes transactions that illegally withdraw from these multi-sigs without the permission of whoever actually owns those coins based on what happens on the Ethereum side, right? So like, what if Bitcoin miners start enforcing the rule that withdrawals from the bridge actually like are only valid if they're valid according to the rules in the contracts on the Ethereum side? And if you do that, then basically you would end up making a kind of the Bitcoin chain really tightly coupled to the Ethereum chain. And that would be a really, like, if you start doing that, then like even a lot of Bitcoin side security concerns just start becoming much less. And that would be just an interesting future to explore even theoretically. But like, this is all kind of going extreme in one direction, right? The other direction, of course, is that this just all remains a fairly minor and kind of niche interest of people. And that, there's just, I don't know, it keeps on being there, and there's an activity keeps on happening, but kind of the bulk of Ethereum activity continues to be in other pastures. I mean, that's the more boring side. And like, don't let the fact that I spent, 5 minutes talking about the exciting side and 1 minute talking about the boring side make you think that I think the exciting side has a 5 times higher chance of happening than the boring side. And no, it's not. It's just 5 times more exciting, right? So, there's a big chance that the boring thing will just happen, and I mean, that's fine. I mean, these are all just experiments that have some probability that's like individually a low probability of becoming really interesting and big, but kind of on the whole, there's always something that ends up making a big difference.
Let's switch to talking about how the crypto space has become kind of part of the geopolitical balance of power, I would say, in the last couple years. And one of the pieces of news that involves Ethereum is that China's blockchain service network is being built to interact with the public Ethereum blockchain. And I wondered what your feelings were about that. It's being compared to how China's ByteDance has the TikTok version, which is the version used outside of China. But as we've seen in the last few years, China obviously has been perpetrating these human rights abuses, with the concentration camps of the Uyghurs. It's been using its economic power to censor organizations like the NBA or the World Health Organization. There are concerns about data privacy and security for users of apps like TikTok. Is there any risk to users of Ethereum who connect to BSN nodes?
I definitely don't see how the BSN would have the ability to kind of break the Ethereum network. I mean, unless this is all somehow, crazy 4-dimensional chess, a kind of like a front for some kind of 51% attack, but I see that chance as being very unlikely. Like the somewhat more realistic concern, of course, is that, there's nodes that are spy nodes and they'll inform the Chinese government of what IP addresses are sending what transactions, and that's not just the Chinese government concern. Of course, there's the U.S. government, and you don't even have to go into conspiracy theories. There's Chainalysis, the company which is known to be working with U.S. law enforcement, and it's in their economic interest to work with other people's law enforcement too. Ethereum users should definitely be operating under the assumption that kind of at network level, there's a lot of spy nodes going around. If they want privacy, they should basically combine blockchain level privacy with things like Tornado.cash, or some of the better things that are coming out with network level privacy. If you have a transaction to send that needs privacy, you just hop on a VPN or whatever. Or doesn't have to be a VPN, could be Tor, could be any of these things. No, that's definitely in one aspect that people should definitely be kind of thinking about. Of course, the other kind of geopolitical aspect of this is that blockchains are potentially kind of the one in kind of environment where applications from kind of all of these different places around the world can just come onto the chain without, and they're not going to just get immediately blocked by whatever country happens to not like them at that point in time. That's interesting. I definitely think that the whole kind of splinter net trends that we're seeing with obviously it started with kind of the Chinese firewall for a long time, and then now these kind of potential concerns about the U.S. banning TikTok, and then India banning 50 Chinese applications, and then Russia doing its thing, and now the EU, a couple of people in the EU interested in doing their thing. Like, I definitely think that kind of trend is very harmful, and it potentially like really risks and like destroying a lot of the kind of brightness and good that I think comes out of the internet, just as a way for the world to come together without that coming together having to be intermediated by all of these politicians with big guns. And it may be, and of course, the original internet, kind of in a lot of ways, has just failed to live up to that promise, right? And especially because a lot of activity has just moved to these kind of centralized corporate platforms. And the blockchain space it has a chance of remaining the one part of the internet that's not that, which is interesting and could have a lot of complicated consequences. I mean, back to China, I have no idea like what people are going to end up using the BSN to kind of to build on Ethereum. It's still like very early and not clear. I mean, like historically, there hasn't even like been much kind of institutionally sanctioned public chain activity at all so far, right? Just because and it's definitely been more kind of private chain oriented, but in a lot of ways, kind of the global mood of the crypto space has shifted from private chains to public chains. And so that's one of those places where you have to like pretty much either split off or adapt. So we'll see. And I definitely like see that like the space is like entering dicey territory in some ways, but at the same time, this is literally a space which was founded with basically a link to a news article that was criticizing a big financial bailout. So like if you're afraid of diciness, then what the hell did you think you're getting into?
In that regard, I actually wanted to ask also about some of these other phenomena that we're seeing with China's DCEP, its digital yuan rolling out. And a lot of people say that this could be China's play to reduce the global reliance on the US dollar. Meanwhile, we've also got the upcoming Libra, which through Facebook and all of the different Facebook platforms will have a larger target user base than the population of China. And then on top of that, we've also got the central bank digital currencies from other countries that will probably be rolling out. And meanwhile, at the same time, we've also got decentralized cryptocurrencies. So when you kind of look at all of these different things that are either waiting in the wings or already coming on stage, where do you think these trends will go?
Yeah, so I think there's different ways to look at central bank digital currencies, right? I mean, there's first of all, kind of the macroeconomic ways of looking at them and just thinking about, what are they, like, will they end up displacing commercial banks and all of those issues. Another way to look at it is also just from like a privacy point of view, which is something that a lot of people in the crypto space kind of care about. And of course, nobody's expecting DCEP to be anywhere remotely privacy preserving kind of in the way that crypto people would like. And that's probably not going to be true of CBDCs in general. But at the same time, the other thing that's happening is basically this kind of change in like what the government's role is with respect to the monetary system. And it feels almost like a push toward kind of government as international platform, right? So like this is something that, like, for example, Estonia has been kind of trying to do for the last decade, right? You have your e-residency and you can kind of be an e-Estonian and you can be part of this Estonian e-community, even if you've never once set foot in Estonia, the country. And they kind of talk excitedly about how, this is the future of government as a platform. And central bank digital currencies might end up being the first big kind of mainstreaming of government as a platform. You could imagine, things like DCEP being used outside of China. Now, I think like China in particular will have kind of more challenges doing that than a lot of other countries just because of, all of the trust issues and the politics and all of that. But at the same time, like especially if you look into central bank digital currencies more broadly, like it's something that you could imagine like governments creating digital currencies, even specifically with the goal of them being used in broader contexts, right? And so you could even imagine, places like Switzerland saying, "Hey, we're going to create a digital coin, and we're going to just create this bit, basically use this to expand our influence on the global stage." And this could end up being like a way for countries to make this kind of political power push. And in terms of the consequences of this, I mean, jurisdictional competition is definitely great in a lot of ways. And it could easily like give access to people who live in like not very competent jurisdictions, like basically access to services provided by kind of international governments and international entities that are much kind of higher in competence. So much more competence, not much more incompetence. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess. And then the other thing that'll be interesting to see is like the extent to which it's possible for these digital currencies to interoperate with public chains, right? So like, could you have a decentralized exchange between a CBDC and Ethereum? And maybe you could, right? Because ultimately the number of things you need to have to create a decentralized exchange is not that high. You just need the ability for the Ethereum side to be able to verify transactions that are happening on the other side. And if you can do that, then you can exchange between the two systems even trustlessly, right? And I mean, potentially you could even do it in a way that's like very privacy preserving. And so like on the CBDC side, it just looks like another transaction. And then there's smart contracts on the Ethereum side that kind of ensure that everything happens correctly. So once you have decentralized exchanges between these systems, then suddenly you have this kind of much more liquid kind of global financial environment, which would also be interesting to see.
Definitely. One of the biggest black eyes for Ethereum has been the indictment of head of special projects Virgil Griffith for allegedly helping the North Korean regime evade sanctions. Virgil was one of the highest ranking people within the Ethereum Foundation, and you knew he was going to go to North Korea beforehand and even urged him to enjoy himself while he was there. Did it not occur to you or anyone at the foundation that his going there might end up harming the foundation's reputation?
I mean, I think especially given that he was just going as an individual, and he was kind of very clear on that in multiple points. I guess the big thing is that the Ethereum Foundation definitely has a kind of, for better or for worse, culture of respecting its members' autonomy, basically. And I mean, you can see that in a lot of ways. I mean, you can see that in, foundation developers arguing with each other on Twitter. You can see that with Virgil, independently deciding that it would be cool to check out North Koreans and, seeing, what their blockchain conferences are up to, and just people working on a lot of independent things. So I think like that's a culture that's definitely done kind of a lot more good than harm for the foundation. And I definitely don't think that there's that many people that think, Ethereum Foundation bad because Virgil did this North Korea trip. At least that's been my own general impression, right? That it's, in terms of the news, it's kind of happened once and then quieted down after that. Like, I guess the long-term consequences of all of that whole trip in general just seem like, okay, he went once and then there was another conference and he is like obviously not able to go. And like, I forgot it might have even been canceled because of the virus. And then in the future, realistically, he's not going to go to any of those either. The things that they'll do with blockchains are the things that they'll do with blockchains, I think, regardless of who pops over for a visit for a couple of days.
Well, but actually, I wanted to ask, so just beyond the foundation or what the government says about what Virgil did, I just wanted to ask from the perspective of Ethereum's reputation as being, the unicorns and rainbows, cryptocurrency. I mean, doing anything with or for what is the most brutal regime on the planet is, as Alex Gladstein of the Human Rights Foundation pointed out, the least cypherpunk thing anyone could do. So just from that perspective alone, did it ever occur to either you or anyone within Ethereum that it might not be a good idea for Virgil to do that?
I mean, I think there's definitely people who are opposed to it from the beginning, and there was definitely people who were fine with it from the beginning. I mean, I guess I don't know, and this is definitely one of those questions where like it's hard to be certain kind of after the fact, and it's even harder to be certain ahead of time. Like, I definitely think that like this kind of view that because a country's government does something bad means that you have to kind of completely kind of ostracize the country, and you can't even take one trip to a blockchain conference. Like, is it even necessarily clear that that's true? I don't know. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't kind of claim certainty that it was the right choice, but and I think also saying that just going out to different jurisdictions and including the unfriendly ones, and kind of giving them taking a chance to listen to them is kind of outright a bad thing. I think like that opinion is also a bit too extreme to be able to say confidently.
I don't think you listened to this podcast episode I did with a human rights activist and North Korean defector, Yeonmi Park, but I will send it to you because in it she talks about what it was like to live under that regime. And it's really, truly just a brutal dictatorship. And it's just a country that has, jail.
I'm definitely aware there's lots of very terrible things happening in North Korea. Like, I'm not denying any of those things. Like,
all right. Well, on a related note, I wanted to ask also about Steven Narioff, a technologist and lawyer who helped Ethereum with its crowd sale. He was charged with extortion of a company that was trying to hold an ICO in late 2017. And between this and Virgil, I wonder, do you feel Ethereum in general needs to do a better job of vetting the people who become involved with the foundation or other core members of the project?
Steven is definitely a separate case. Like Ethereum before about 2015, like there's definitely this founding team, and the founding team had like a lot of characters that today I definitely don't approve of, and at the time I had no idea how to even like tell apart good people from bad people, and pretty much everyone seemed reasonable to me, and so like at the time I definitely didn't have the ability to kind of detect the problems in someone like Steven Narioff. And I think since then, the Ethereum Foundation has gotten much better. Since then, like a lot of the kind of characters that caused us a lot of damage at the beginning, we've successfully distanced ourselves from. And I think kind of more recently, we have a team that, in general, we're very happy with. And I'm definitely not willing to allow kind of Virgil to be put into the bad character bucket just because he was more geopolitically open-minded than a lot of other people. Like I'm very happy to kind of burn reputation points defending him to some extent there. He is like, no, and that's definitely not the same thing as like what Steven did, which involved like huge amounts of like fraud and behaving in, I think, definitely very like ways that made women around him very uncomfortable at the very least, and all of those things. Like doing that, that's a shady character, man. And like, I'm definitely happy I'm better at that. I think the Ethereum Foundation's better at detecting him than it was at detecting a lot of other people. But Virgil's still a friend, and I'm looking forward to him no longer being in house confinement soon.
Over the years, the Ethereum Foundation has also come under fire for being unusually opaque, which is seemingly at odds with the purported transparency of the blockchain world. I don't know if it doesn't seem to me the foundation has made much more effort to become more transparent. There continues to be no org chart. There are a lot of people involved in the foundation who have no title but have a lot of influence. Do you have plans to address this situation, or are you comfortable with this?
I definitely would have to dispute the charge that the Ethereum Foundation is this incredibly opaque organization. Like, I think, I mean, first of all, there's all of these sort of bi-weekly kind of very frequent updates from each of the individual teams on, the clients and like all the software and the individual projects that they're working on. There's all of these developer calls that are public. I mean, we very frequently publish information about what our finances are. And regarding org charts, I think, I mean, the challenge there is just the Ethereum Foundation's organization is definitely kind of not conventional in a lot of ways. And so it's hard to communicate that, right? And it's like the formal chart is not even necessarily going to reflect the underlying reality of how people interact with each other. Like, I think, I remember like something like a year ago, I think it was Virgil that published kind of an actual chart of like basically who talks to whom in the Ethereum Foundation. And that chart was basically just like automatically generated from the results of giving people surveys. And that ended up just being a much more accurate description of like who does what in the Ethereum Foundation than, any kind of description of the formal structure could have been.
And was that made public?
I don't remember. This is something that I'll probably have to look up. But I guess like the larger point is that like there's a lot of people kind of complaining about lack of transparency, but the thing that I don't see as much is just specific items of things that they want to be transparent about. Like in terms of just outputs of the Ethereum Foundation, I feel like we try hard to be transparent, and we publish blog posts detailing our grants. We publish blog posts detailing our all the different project teams and what they've been working on. I publish like fairly regularly what the Ethereum Foundation's financial situation is and all of these things. So if people could just say in kind of more specific and explicit terms, like here is one thing that I don't know that I would like to know. And that's definitely something that I think would definitely help me and help us a lot.
On Twitter, Anne Connolly, who's blockchain faculty at Singularity University, asked, are you concerned about the lack of diversity in Ethereum, particularly in development? And she asked if that could also potentially impact the success of Ethereum in the long run.
I definitely feel like we've tried hard to be diverse in a lot of ways, and even just trying hard to like nurture communities in a lot of different countries is probably the one biggest example. And then we have a lot of different kinds of people on kind of different layers of our team. We have a lot of people from the US, and we have Aya, who is our executive director, and she has been kind of pushing in a different perspective and like focusing on inclusion and a lot of these other things. Like we've had some teams in Europe, some teams in Asia, some team increasingly a couple of people based in India. So on that dimension, there's definitely a lot of things that we've kind of tried to do. I'm sure that there's a kind of entire kind of communities and sub-communities that we've just kind of completely failed to kind of reach out to and integrate with. And last year we've tried to just to get into the African community more, for example. But even still, like there is a lot that we're missing, I'm sure. The challenge there is just that like any organizations and any community's eyes are ultimately kind of limited. And so like if you think there's groups of people that the Ethereum ecosystem has been ignoring, then that's something that I'm sure once again, we'd be very kind of happy to hear about. And it's something we always appreciate getting help in. I mean, there's also just a kind of currents that we have to deal with in terms of, what kinds of people by default sort of get interested in crypto by themselves, right? Like crypto tends to be, heavily kind of U.S. focused, heavily focused on like wealthier people in the United States, especially. It's like a very particular demographics that are kind of interested in like computer science and monetary theory and all of these things. So there are groups that have tried to kind of make Ethereum relevant for other communities. Like there's, all of these different exchanges in different countries that just try to support people, using ETH as a way of moving money around. I mean, to give a more dicey example, there's like the stuff that Amin has done around sex workers, which is, definitely far away from kind of the kinds of communities that crypto typically reaches out to, even though sex worker communities definitely have a lot of problems around just getting discriminated against in a whole bunch of ways.
Amin Soleimani.
Yes, Amin Soleimani. So, yeah, and I guess we've been trying. We always welcome pointers on like who we can be, who we're missing, and who we can reach out to better.
So here we are 5 years after the launch of Ethereum. Where would you like to see Ethereum go in the next 5 years?
Getting Ethereum 2.0 done is really important. Yeah.
Hopefully before the end of the next 5 years.
I think getting Ethereum to the point where like that list of applications I mentioned earlier, kind of the things that I'm excited about people using Ethereum for, would actually is something that like lots and lots of people use Ethereum for, and where Ethereum is something that is just a regular part of people's lives in a lot of different communities and a lot of different contexts, and isn't just about like something by and for Ethereum people. Yeah, and I think getting the technology to that point and just getting to the point where you actually have like lots of people from in lots of places from around the world deriving value from Ethereum, and then just getting both of those two things done, I think would be a great place to be.
And do you have any general predictions about crypto that you want to make about the next 5 years?
I don't know. I think, well, there's things that I can say. So like one thing that I can say is that the research side of the crypto space has definitely already made a kind of very sharp move away from being like, hey, let's like think in very abstract terms and let's figure out just what things exist in the first place, to just, okay, we know exactly what can be done and what can't be done, and let's keep just making improvements to the things that we know that we can do. And like a lot of Ethereum research has moved into that second category already. A lot of Ethereum research, around things like sharding, proof of stake, zero knowledge proofs, like all of these things has already moved into that kind of more incremental category. And I think 5 years from now we'll be even further there. Like I think right now we're in kind of that transition from, abstract research to development and optimization. And I think 5 years from now, we'll be thoroughly in a kind of optimization phase. I'm generally expecting that crypto will just kind of continue its long march to just being more normal and being more just kind of a part of people's lives that everyone just expects to exist. And that'll be a good change in a lot of ways.
Great. Let's hope so, because currently my friends think what I do is kind of weird. But anyway. So where can people learn more about you and Ethereum?
Ethereum.org.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on Unchained.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about Vitalik and Ethereum, check out the show notes for this episode. Don't forget, you can now watch video recordings of the shows on the Unchained YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/c/Unchained podcast and subscribe today. Unchained is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Anthony Yoon, Daniel Nuss, and the team at CLK Transcription. Thanks for listening.